go really into the thick of the science and understand that if you see an animal in the wild eating all three macronutrients, carbs, fat, and proteins, clearly it's okay for you to do the same.
We are about to launch. Truth Not Trends. What's up, everybody? Liam TAKU Bauer here at TNT Strength Oakland headquarters in Oakland, California. This is episode 179 of the Truth Not Trends podcast, and I am here in my studio. We like to help people learn how to strength train as safely and efficiently as possible. That's what this podcast is all about. Today, we have an amazing guest, Dr. Alexander Hutchison. This is the second time we're having the privilege of having Dr. Hutchison join us. We discussed his book called In Defense of Doping previously, and now we've got him back talking about another amazing book that he wrote called Exercise Ain't Enough, HIIT, Honey, and the Hadza. We had a great conversation. I always enjoy having him on the show, and I have to say that you're going to love it as much as I do. Before we get into that, I got to say, don't forget, we have 5 amazing supplements in the TNT Strength store. We recommend a high-protein whole food diet, but if you feel like you're having some holes in your game with regards to nutrition, we have a nice whey protein. We have probiotics for that gut health. We have K2D3 for those immunities.
Immunities? What the hell are immunities?
We have some creatine monohydrate, the best performance supplement on the market, the most researched, and it has the most bang for your buck. Everyone should be taking it every day. And of course, we also have some... What's the last thing we have? Oh man, I can't even remember now. We got, anyway, there's a bunch. What is it, Des?
Dr. Hutchison is also on episode 171 of the Truth Not Trends.
171. So go back and check out 171. Don't miss it and enjoy this supplements in the TNT store. And also, if you're looking for an amazing piece of equipment to build your home gym around, I highly recommend the Anata Gym. Anata Gym makes smart gyms, as they call them. They're these very simple computerized platforms that allow you to basically perform any strength training exercise you can imagine. They have 3 different offerings, P1 Lite, P1 Pro, and P1 Max. The P1 Max allows you to train with up to over 300 pounds of resistance. You can do squats, you can do deadlifts, you can do every exercise you can possibly imagine. Extremely space conservative. You can slide it under your bed. You can build it like the best home gym you can imagine. It also replicates the same as using bands, using centripetal devices, or just standard weights. So basically you can engage the resistance in multiple ways, literally with the touch of a button. If you're interested in looking at it, check out their website, anotagym.com. And if you use the code TAKU, T-A-K-U, you can get 20% off anyone in the store. Definitely worthwhile. Now, I have to say we had a little technical glitch at the end of this particular episode. So it literally just cut off. I don't know what's going on. My computer is having some serious problems. It's been plugged in all day, but it says it's gonna be hours before it's fully charged. It's telling me I've only got a small percentage of power. So clearly there's something wrong with my charging capacity. My computer literally went black right in the middle of our conversation. So I apologize for the abrupt cutoff. Desmond will find some way to fix it because he's magic. So tune in for this episode of the Truth Not Trends podcast. Boom, baby.
Boom, baby.
Here we are back in the studio and thrilled to have Dr. Alexander Hutchison back with us on the TNT podcast. Thank you so much for making some time to come back on the show.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So last time we discussed your book In Defense of Doping, and we had a lot of great feedback about that episode. And I know that you had written some other books, and you were kind enough to share some with me. And this particular book that we're going to start talking about right now is called Exercise Ain't Enough, HIIT, Honey, and the Hadza. And this should be interesting. High intensity interval training is something I've been playing around with for decades at this point. And I was a big proponent of briefer, more intense stuff in the very beginning of my career, before it even had a name, really. I mean, interval training obviously has been around in many forms forever, but I started my career in the late 80s. And, at that time, the long cardio was just king still. And people would literally come to the gym and spend like 2 hours on the Stairmaster or something. You know what I mean?
I remember the days.
Yeah. And I would, and of course, step aerobics was thumping in the background 24 hours a day. I would do I'd get on the bike and go 10 minutes as hard as I could, just huffing and puffing. And that's all I did. And at the time, they meaning the bigger fitness masses sort of considered me to be a strength guy who didn't do any aerobic activity at all. And they actually did a study, interestingly enough, where they brought me in as a part of the control, because they were like, well, he's a guy who doesn't do cardio, so we're going to use him as one side of the equation. And but they did the VO2 max testing, of course, on a stationary bicycle, which was real standard. And I ended up getting close to 60 in my VO2 max or something. And they were like dumbfounded because as far as they were concerned, I did zero cardio. And they're like, I don't understand what's that. And, I just did strength training, and I was, I did well on flexibility, everything. I did well on all right. And they were like very confused by that.
Yeah, I can see that in the late 80s. Yeah.
Yeah. So they were like, I don't understand how he can be good at this when he doesn't do it. And I said, well, I literally ride a bike, right? Hard. And now you put me on a bike, it's like, it was those classic, ACSM submax bicycle ergometer thing, right? Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting anecdote. But I really want to hear you tell me about it, because you're the expert. And that's why I got you here. And I would love to hear you share your thoughts about what made you write the book. And
Sure. So the impetus for the book came really from my wife posing a challenge to me. We were standing in line at San Antonio International Airport, waiting to get through security. And I had a book, and I don't remember for the life of me which book it was, but it was one that several of my clients, because I was coaching athletes at the time, had suggested that I read because they liked it a lot. So I bought the book, and as I was trying to get through it, it was very clear to me that the person who wrote this had very little understanding of biochemistry, just basic biochemistry. And so I got to, maybe the second chapter, and I just couldn't take anymore. So I put the book into the recycle bin. It wasn't the garbage; it was the recycle bin. But my wife is, she's very conscientious about books, so nothing should ever be tossed out. And to some degree, she's right. But I told her, look, it is the recycle bin. I didn't throw it out. And I said, I just can't read it anymore. It's such crap. These guys are just so poorly educated on exercise physiology, and they're giving a lot of misinformation to people who need the right stuff. And she point blank just said, look, if you think you can do better, maybe you should sit down and actually write a book. I'm like, wow, okay. That's right in your face, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then shortly thereafter, COVID hit. And as a professor at the time, I had plenty of downtime because all of my classes were already set. Recording lectures to be put online for my students was not difficult to do. And so I had extra time to actually sit there and do something. And I thought, this is a good topic that I want to go after. Now, why this specific topic? I had seen a news story on the Hadza tribe. So this is as close to Paleolithic man as we're going to get in our current environment. They live in Tanzania, which is in Eastern Africa, and it is a hunter-gatherer tribe. And in this particular news story, they were talking about how they had done, these researchers had gone out there and done measurements on their cardiovascular fitness, proxy measures, because they use doubly labeled water. They couldn't transport all the equipment out to where they would need to be.
Sure.
But they got very good measures of their resting metabolic rates, and then also their physical activity level. And then those obviously combined, you get a total activity or a total energy expenditure. And what you would expect from a hunter-gatherer tribe is that they would have these massive numbers that were significantly higher than us in the West, eating our Western diets. And although their activity levels were higher, for sure, their total energy expenditure was not that much different than what you would expect or what you would see in Westerners who are sedentary and eating a high calorie, high fat, high carbohydrate diet. And that was somewhat unexpected. What came from that is a very clear indication in terms of how the body changes over time when we expose it to what we call a traditional Western diet. And that's going to be very large portions of highly processed foods, which are somewhat lacking in micronutrient density. And the theory behind this then became, well, how is it that, if we took these same people and we transplanted them into Texas, how long would it take, or would they ever actually change their body composition and their physiology to match what we have now, having lived on that diet for a period of time? Same question going the other way. If we take somebody who's been in a Western diet in a sedentary lifestyle for a long period of time, and then we plop them over with a Hadza, basically do like, a student exchange, what will we see in terms of their physiology and their changes to suit their environment at that particular point in time? And what was very clear is that although if you took a Hadza individual and exposed them to our diet and our lack of physical activity, they wouldn't make an immediate adjustment. They would make minor adjustments initially to the additional caloric intake that they're having by burning off extra calories. But eventually, physiologically, living creatures, when they're exposed to large quantities of food, they look on it as being a feast or famine type situation.
Sure.
If you're exposed to a huge quantity of additional calories for a long period of time, chronically, your body just says, okay, this is our new normal, but we need to be prepared for the day that comes when famine will be here because eventually it will.
Yeah, of course.
And so we pack on those additional calories and we store them. Now, you can take some and pop them over into the Hadza side, and your body will fight you tooth and nail for a period of time to maintain that same level of caloric consumption and expenditure. But eventually, you will settle into a pattern where you're going to shed those additional pounds and look very different and have a different health outcome than you would if you'd stayed here. So the body does what we tell it to do in terms of what we expose it to.
Sure.
So as I was stating, if you think of any animal and, any other animal that we would see in the wild is going to be in a feast or famine situation. Part of that is going to be seasonal. Part of that is going to be environmental changes that happen acutely. When you see individuals and animals that are in a feast phase, they put on additional pounds and they store that predominantly in the form of fat because it has lots of caloric, it has more calories than do carbs or protein. But we also can just store infinitely more of that than we can carbohydrate in the form of glycogen. And of course, we don't have any storage form of protein. All proteins are functional. So if we're going to turn to that, then we have to actually break down lean mass. So when we look at that, the body does exactly what it knows to do. During times of famine, we're going to go, the first thing we'll chop up is going to be our carbohydrate stores, which we have in our liver and our muscles that'll last maybe a day. And then we'll start to go after fat. But we have so much fat that we can live off of that for a while. The animals that are going to be suited to survive those conditions are be the ones that actually have the capacity to store more fat than the leaner animals. So to some degree, this is an evolutionary advantage that we've built for ourselves when things are normal and as they should be. But over the course of the last 150 to 200 years, obviously, we've changed our lifestyle as animals to allow for us to have food at all times. We're never in a position where we have to be in famine, minus some really, obviously war, or if you live in an area where that is, where famine is common, then you might see it more often. But in developed countries, even those who are homeless are not going to go without meals if they choose not to, because someone's going to have some food for them to eat on a regular basis. So when you look at, the folks who are obese and overweight, they have an evolutionary advantage when things are natural, as it were. But when you put that same person into this environment where they have tons of food that's processed and hugely calorically rich, and they don't have to work out ever, then you have an obesity crisis. So when people say, what are we going to do about this epidemic? Well, there's nothing the human body needs to do. It has evolved over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, to do exactly what it has been trained to do.
Yeah.
What we have to do is change our behaviors within a calorically rich environment to prevent us from getting overweight and obese.
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind right away. I saw another sort of some experiment where it was in Australia, actually, and you might have come across this, where they took the native Aboriginals who were now exposed primarily to the Western eating, and their health was terrible. And they just took a group of them and said, we're going to take you back to your ancestral eating patterns and activity, right? And let's see what happens. And of course, what happens is exactly what you described. They quickly improved all markers of health and, lost, improved body composition. All these things improved just by, going back to a more nutrient dense, diet, simpler, more movement, all that stuff that was built into their ancestry. Because, and you see that with so many native populations, the Inuit or whatever, when they become westernized and, and they're eating more sugar, here you got people that were living on blubber and right? And whale and seal meat, and now they're, sugar is abundant, and teeth are rotting out, and they're, all that stuff. So yeah, it's interesting to see. It does, hold true how you described it, for sure. And the other thing, yeah, it's funny. I tell my clients all the time, like even the ones that think they look like okay, like, hey, I don't have too much fat. I'm like, you literally have enough fat to go out and run a couple marathons, right now. Like, you know what I mean? We all have it, no matter how we look, unless we, like you said, unless we're emaciated. So, I mean, we have plenty, and we definitely don't need all that extra, so yeah, our bodies we're designed to handle it.
When you look at so for the title of it, Exercise Ain't Enough, my wife and I opened a gym in 2014, and we ran it till 2017, and then we sold it, and we had a group come after us to ask us to sell, and we did. But it was a very successful gym, and we ran it quite well. The one thing that we would always get, regardless of whether it was a CrossFitter who was coming over to us or just a weekend warrior kind of person, is that they all wanted to lose weight to some degree.
Sure.
And they wanted to use exercise as their primary means by which they were going to lose weight. And I would always have to break the news to them. I'm sorry, but that's just not going to work. When it comes to weight loss and weight maintenance, diet always trumps exercise. So let me give you an example.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I literally have this conversation like every week.
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And so I think it's a lot easier for people to build exercise into their lifestyle as opposed to going the other route, which is to change their diet. Changing diet is really difficult, and you have to be highly motivated in order to do it, one. And two, you have to really see the justification for why you have to. It's easy to go and do a workout that someone else has written for you. You just have to come in, do it, and leave. You have an hour, you're done. That part is easy. But the rest of 3 meals a day plus snacks, and I only see you for an hour or maybe 4 days a week. The rest of the time you're on your own. It's hard for people to really understand that they have to make a lifestyle switch, and exercise alone isn't going to cut it. Now, there are definitely physiological parameters that will benefit from exercise, whether you change your diet or not. No question.
For sure. Absolutely.
But if you want the biggest impact, you got to change both. And if you're only going to pick one, it needs to be the diet. So when we look at the amount of calories that you burn just sitting on your butt all day, that's going to be your resting metabolic rate effectively. So this basically means how much energy does your body need in order to just run all of its basic functions and keep you alive. Then anything that you're going to add on top of that is going to be your physical activity level that you will do in addition to staying alive. Okay. And we get a certain number of calories that you would have to have every day in order to do that. So if you're just being a couch potato and you have this set number that we have for you in terms of the number of calories that you have to have, and then we say the very next day, okay, today you're going to go run a marathon. And we look at how many additional calories do you actually burn? Effectively, we get basically a doubling. Okay. So think of that. You have to run 26 and a half miles to double the number of calories that you would burn if you just sat on your butt and did nothing.
Right.
It's not an efficient way to go.
No.
And if you look at the actual number of calories that we take extra over what we actually need, it's usually around 1.5 times what we actually, so almost double what we actually need. Every day to day and a half, you'd have to run a marathon in order to compensate for the additional calories that you're taking in that you don't need.
Yeah, one of the examples I use a lot is, I tell people, you could run on a treadmill at 10 miles an hour, for 30 minutes. And, maybe you're going to burn 300 calories. And, you could eat like 6 chocolate chip cookies in like a minute and put those calories right back in.
That's right.
I have so many people that don't understand even the basic concept of having an actual deficit, right? And I know I'm preaching to the choir, having you having owned a gym, right? You got those people that come in and they literally do it for that reason. Like, I'm doing this right now, and the machine says I burned 300 calories. So now I'm going to go eat that piece of cheesecake that I wanted.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, I understand. But I said, do you see that you just filled back in? You didn't have a deficit now. You're back to zero.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Or worse.
Yeah, you haven't actually accomplished the goal. Yes, you can eat the cheesecake, but you're not, moving in the direction you're trying to go. And staying with the idea that if of the two choices, that the nutrition choice is the more important, which I totally agree. We just had a recent episode we did based on some research, which you might have seen, about protein intake specifically, but how they had these control groups and different groups where they ate their macronutrient maintenance levels, but one group is eating very low protein at maintenance, one group is eating high protein at maintenance, and other groups are eating above maintenance, but filling that extra calories only with protein. And these were non-exercising groups. And the groups that ate at maintenance and or above but but it was all protein adjustments, gained muscle even without exercising,
Sure.
which is fascinating, right? And again, they in other words, they had improved body composition with no extra activity, just by how they manipulated the total macronutrient profile, and protein being the lever that they're pulling. So that, again, this is something that we're trying to get our clients to understand on a daily basis, and they fight you tooth and nail on it. Every day someone tells me it's so hard to meet my protein requirements. I go, but how come you can exceed your carbohydrate requirements? They're the same amount of calories.
Yeah, it's easier and less filling to eat carbohydrates than it is to eat protein. I mean, that is a challenge in and of itself. And then the other thing is that, I mean, we like sweets. I mean, we are evolved to like sweets because those things are calorically dense, and they're also the when we think of the fuels that we have. So we can burn fat. We like to burn fat mostly because it's calorically dense. And so you get a bigger bang for your buck. As you and I are sitting here talking now, around 70% of our calories that are going towards the purposes of ATP production are coming from fat. And then, of course, as we start to exercise, the higher the intensity of the exercise, the more of a switch we get over to carbohydrates, largely because carbohydrates burn significantly faster than fats do. But the key point here is that there is one tissue that can't live off of anything but carbs, and that's neural tissue. So the brain has to have carbs present. Now, we can burn ketos. So it will have a secondary backup there. But if we completely obliterate carbohydrates out of our diet, let's just say we strip them all the way out, we will make ketos from fat, which is why we lose weight. But we will also, if we're not careful, go after protein because it breaks down and gets converted via gluconeogenesis into carbohydrates much faster than fat will, if at all. And so those diets, you have to be very careful with them if you're an athlete who's concerned about maintaining your lean mass, because some of it's going to get chopped up.
Yeah.
You have to have some carbs in your system to stave off your body's desire to convert that protein into carbohydrate. So every one of the studies that you look at, particularly in athletes, that has keto as a base or as a supplement is going to make sure that they have a baseline level of carbohydrate on a daily basis to prevent excess body mass loss or muscle mass loss.
Yeah. And again, ultimately, we know that, humans are expressed on a broad continuum, and there's not going to be like one macronutrient ratio that's like the best for everyone, like the zone, right? But
all of those.
Yeah. What I often do when working with my clients is I try to start them off with what I call isocaloric, like basically like the equal amounts of calories from all three categories, right? So basically 33% carbs, 33% fat, 33% protein. I find it seems to meet all the needs. It's lower carbs than a lot of people, but still plenty. It seems to usually meet the protein requirements, right? All that stuff. So that's a place where I often start when I'm helping people try to create a nutrition plan. But, ultimately, right, for most of us, if we're not athletes, you do the one that you like best, right? Like if you enjoy the lower carb stuff and you can manage it and it works for you, then by all means. And same thing with higher carbs, as long as it's helping you achieve the outcome, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So but even within that, there's not all fats are created equal, not all carbs are created equal. So
for sure,
we went through a long phase there in the 80s and early 90s where fat bad, everything was fat free.
Oh my God, yeah.
Fat tastes so damn good though. So if you yank it out of a food product, that thing tastes like cardboard.
Yeah.
So you have to replace that flavor with something. And so what do we do? What the food industry does? It just pumps a bunch of carbs in there.
Yeah, sugar baby.
So then eventually we get used to the idea that this is not the right way to go. And then we start to go back towards the idea, okay, now carbohydrates is really the issue. But instead of saying it's not just carbs, it's specifically table sugar that is the issue. Table sugar is an issue. High fructose corn syrup is an issue. But carbs encompasses everything, right? So that's going to be starches, it's going to be oligosaccharides, polysaccharides, all those things. And there are several of those that are quite healthy. So when we just label everything in terms of carbs bad, we get ourselves into trouble again, because obviously we have to have some level of them, and everything is going to have some amount of carbs in it. So the reason I put honey in the title was specifically because the Hadza tribe loves honey. Now, honey is not table sugar. It is a very complex set of chemicals and flavonoids, and the composition changes depending on the season, depending on the species of bee, depending on what types of sap they can get their hands on, these bees, to produce their honey. But it is a very, very healthy substance to eat in moderation. But again, part of my reason for writing this book was to say, look, just don't believe the hype and don't believe the marketing scheme to make you believe this, or just to make you listen to this short phrase of fat bad, carbs bad, and now what's going to be next? We're going to talk about protein or something. Go really into the thick of the science and understand that if you see an animal in the wild eating all three macronutrients, carbs, fat, and proteins, clearly it's okay for you to do the same.
Well, it's funny. As you mentioned, back in the 80s, that was when like eggs became evil, right? Especially the yolk,
Yeah,
right? The yolk was vilified.
Cholesterol.
Yeah. Oh my God. But we get a lot of that too, because we're obviously encouraging our clients to meet their protein needs, especially because they're strength training. And the big pushback you get all the time is like, well, eating protein's bad for your kidneys, right? And we're at the point now where I had a woman here. She was actually here today, and I said, if you can find me one piece of research that says that kidneys are going to be damaged by, like a normal healthy person eating high protein, if you can show me anything that's telling me that's true, then I'll give you a month of free training. You know what I mean? I was like, those papers don't exist. Like there's nothing wrong with protein.
That's right.
In a normal, healthy, functioning body. I mean, in these days, they're starting to realize, like, you went through those years where don't eat more than 30 grams at a time because your body can't handle it, right? And all that stuff is, constantly being modified, of course.
So that said, and I'm glad you brought me to this. There's a guy at Florida Gulf Coast University, and I saw him at the NSCA conference in 2021. He did a great presentation just on this topic of exactly how much protein can we consume, because we just don't know. And so let's go through the normal numbers that we have. If you're non-active human, then your maintenance level of protein should be around 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight that you consume a day. That's the number that we're given. If you're an athlete, between 1.2 and 2, and then pregnant women are around 1.3. So we have all these numbers. Okay? His question was, if we go above 2 grams per kilogram of body weight of protein consumption per day, what does that look like? And he couldn't get it past his IRB because they kept saying anything above 2, and then you could have liver and kidney issues. All right. Well, there's nothing in the literature to suggest that this is true. This is just a wives' tale. Like 8-ounce glasses of water a day. Where the hell did that come from? Nobody knows.
Right.
Now, I'm not suggesting that water, by any stretch, you can drink more than that if you want or less. That's fine. But my point being, where does this come from? We don't know.
Yeah.
Somehow it gets out in the zeitgeist and it just sticks. So he said, all right, well, look, let me test this. And if we get these numbers doing, if we get any damaging numbers from liver tests or kidney tests, then we'll stop the experiment immediately. So they went up to 3 grams per kilogram of body weight. No changes in any of those profiles whatsoever. So then they decided, let's see if we can crank it up to 4. Now, let me explain just how difficult it is to consume enough food to get in 4 grams per kilogram of body weight of protein per day.
Yeah, it's so filling, like you were saying earlier.
It's a chore. It's an extra job.
Yeah, you tap out trying to eat all that steak. I can't take it in.
So he had highly motivated individuals who were taking whey protein supplements and, not raw, but just straight up chicken breasts that were cooked with nothing on them. They would just eat them straight. And they got up to 4 for 6 different individuals and followed them for between 6 and 24 months. No changes at all in liver function or kidney function or any of their other health parameters. The primary thing that they saw was that their body composition shifted dramatically more towards lean mass because they were consuming so little carbohydrate and so little fat that they turned to their fat mass that they had to burn it and also to turn into ketones.
Yeah, totally. And of course, for me, it makes perfect sense. Totally. I mean, I think they even said they were having, people, I don't know if it's the same guy, but I remember reading some stuff very recently where they had people taking in, 100 grams of protein at one feeding, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And again, because they used to say, oh, if you eat more than 30 grams, it's not good. But again, it depends on lots of other things. It's funny. That's the answer we find ourselves giving at TNT a lot is when people ask us these questions. A lot of times, it's, well, the answer, it depends, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I go, if you go to a gym and they have a hard answer for every question you ask, you should probably leave because they're probably making shit up. You know what I mean? because I said it depends on a lot of factors, right? And have you eaten any protein today? No, then it's probably fine for you to eat 100 grams of protein. Your body wants it; it needs it. If you didn't eat all day for some reason, you were out working on the car and got lost track of time. Go eat as much as you want, right? It's just ridiculous.
The other place that I would always ask my athletes to consume protein was immediately after a workout, largely because I saw the dietary habits of these individuals, and so they're hungry after they get done with their workout. They also have this idea of this reward mentality, reward feeding. I did this great workout, and so I'm going to treat myself to an extra cookie. That's amplified even more by the fact that they leave the gym hungry.
Right.
And so as a form of an appetite suppressant, the first thing I would say is, look, just go to the store and get yourself a tub of whey protein and a little shaker and use that as your snack after the practice.
Yeah.
We'll get one of the bars that's high in protein and low in refined carbohydrates and use that instead. And you get a lot of success with that. It really does prevent you from overeating when the time comes that you can refuel.
Absolutely. It's funny. I often, that's sometimes around my my holiday strategies for people too. Is like I'll tell them, have a protein shake before you go to the party. You know what I mean? Have a protein shake before you go shopping. Don't go shopping hungry, right? We always come out with weird stuff in our cart. You're like, why is this in my cart? You're starving in the grocery store. Suddenly you're buying White Castle hamburgers for the microwave or something. So I totally, I agree. And for me, it became a habit as well to have a protein shake right after my workouts. There's no downside to it. And as you say, it has all those benefits of, perhaps still filling the need of the reward, because you can make a tasty protein shake, right? But then meeting all these other demands as well.
Hey, what are those guys doing here? Whenever I feel like I'm stalling out on my bench press, I know I need a new strength curve.
Whether you're stalling out on the road or stalling out in the gym, you need something with great engineering.
That's right. And
So
I
look
want
for the pendulum.
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 Not just your average strength machines.
No, they have smooth strength curves.
Amazing rigidity.
And did we mention the engineering's fantastic?
That's right. Not to mention, they come in cool colors.
Like red.
And silver. That was kind of weird. What was that all about? Back to the interview.
So tell me about, why do you mention the high intensity interval training specifically in the title of the book?
So beyond what we're talking about there, so this idea of high intensity interval training was first researched by a scientist in Japan. His last name is Tabata. So if you've ever been to a CrossFit gym, you look up at their clock, and in many instances, or on the remote control for it, there's a Tabata setting, which I had never seen before until I read this guy's papers, and I thought, that's where that comes from. How interesting. But basically what they were doing was having people do bouts of exercise that were between 30 seconds and a minute and a half. And they were they were well above VO2 max, 120 to 130%. So we're doing all out sprinting here. And then a control group that did endurance exercise. And then what they were comparing them for was their aerobic fitness, their VO2 max, and then their anaerobic fitness, which they did with a Wingate test. What the theory was that the sprint group would be great for anaerobic fitness and terrible for aerobic fitness. And then conversely, the endurance training group would be great for aerobic fitness and terrible for anaerobic fitness. And then what they got was a big surprise. They got exactly what they thought in terms of the anaerobic fitness for the sprint group. The HIIT group had significantly higher anaerobic fitness and their ability to sustain high intensity work for a longer period of time without fatiguing than did the endurance training group. But surprisingly, the VO2 max was either the same or slightly higher in the HIIT group than it was in the endurance training group. Now, this is just fascinating, because what you see here is that you get a double bang for your buck. You're going to be a doubly good athlete. You're going to be able to do things at high intensity for short blasts of time and then go for a long run and then stop and do it again. So effectively, exactly what CrossFit is and marketed for the better part of 10 years is a combination of these two factors together. Now, why is that the case? What is it about the HIIT training that allows you to improve your VO2 max when you're not doing aerobic work, quote unquote? And the final consensus is that it comes down to changes in blood chemistry during the workout. We are increasing the amount of carbon dioxide that's in the blood. Makes sense. When you combine carbon dioxide and water, you make carbonic acid, so that's going to lower pH. You're liberating large amounts of lactic acid from the muscles into the blood, also lowering the pH of the blood. The body does not like that, particularly the brain. And so you have a potent stimulator that is going to tell the body and direct it to increase the aerobic capacity of the muscles so that they can burn aerobically fat in particular, but also carbs at a higher intensity than they would otherwise. And that's going to happen at a faster rate than if you just do aerobic training. So that's absolutely fascinating. So that's just on the aerobic training end of things to check our aerobic fit. What's more important about HIIT relative to endurance training are all the other physiological components that are improved more so than what you see with endurance training. So we're talking about your heart rate, your resting heart rate will reduce more with HIIT training than it will with endurance training. Your capacity to respond to changes in blood pressure and also heart rate. So your capacity to recover between bouts of exercise is highly improved. Your cognitive skills improve more with HIIT training than they do with endurance training. So our ability to solve puzzles, to get ourselves through a maze on a screen, to retain information, both short-term and long-term, are all improved. Largely, again, we don't want there to be a lot of acid floating around within the brain or even passing through it. So we're going to make it so the blood flows through there faster to clear it out. And the list goes on in terms of, and it's all in the book, the other physiological components of basic health and life that are significantly improved more so with HIIT training than you would see during endurance training. Now, that's not even to count the potential for overusage injuries that you get from endurance training that you don't see at the same levels with HIIT training because you're not doing as much work.
For sure.
Well, actually, that's not true. You're doing the same amount of work in a smaller period of time.
Yeah. You're preaching to the choir, right? Again, I become a champion of this for such a long time ago. And what started me with some of it, I mean, not only as I say, I was doing it, I was a soccer player in college. And, when I started strength training, as I said, I was doing that brief stuff. That was the only quote unquote cardio. I wasn't even playing soccer anymore, except for fun here and there. But throughout my career, I've always been voraciously devouring all this stuff. So I was on top of the Tabata stuff when it very first appeared, and I was working with, as I mentioned, with a lot of combat athletes, and traditionally a lot of them would do this long, slow stuff. I'm working with boxers and MMA people and jujitsu at very high levels, and my original work was trying to get them to understand that they were like wasting a lot of time with like their traditional road work,
Road work. Right.
And so like I worked with at the time in the 90s with the woman who currently at the time was the 3-time women's world boxing champion. And she hired me to be her strength and conditioning coach. And I dumped all the road work and replaced it entirely with interval training. And, she was of course, she had never done any real strength training of any note. So, I mean, I completely changed her entire program. And, she was in better shape, recovering faster, spending way less time, not as beat up, all those things that you mentioned. And, I'm sure you're probably aware of like up McMaster's University, right? They do a ton of work on the interval stuff. Yeah. And they're like championing this concept of like, how low can we go, right? With the volume of stuff to get the benefits. And so they came out with that 1 minute workout. Mm-hmm. And that, that's like 20 seconds of max effort with a 2-minute recovery. And you do it 3 times. So it takes about 10 minutes to do it, but it's only 1 minute of actual maximum effort.
Actual work. Yep.
Yeah. And then they compared that to the traditional stuff. And again, they saw, as you mentioned, all the improvements were as good or better in, this, 30 minutes of total time a week versus about, 3 hours, right, of time. So yeah, I've been a champion of efficiency as well, right? So I never understand why, like right now you have Dr. Peter Attia, his book is just exploding, right? And, he's pushing that, that zone 2 stuff, right? And zone 2 was huge again back in the 70s and 80s. And now it's like the pendulum has swung back, right?
It always does.
And yeah, and everybody thinks they need to be trudging around slowly forever. And I just don't see the point. But I mean, again, it's kind of like the nutrition, right? If you just can't tolerate the short, hard stuff and you like that zone 2, okay. But for me, I choose efficiency every time.
I agree. And so you bring up a good point, because the science backs us up.
Yeah.
There's no questioning the science, but there's also the human component. And there's lots of people who just don't want to feel that way when they're working out. I get it. I do. I want to feel that way. I like the sensation of nausea and having to push myself to that level. But we're crazy that way. Most of the population is not. So if you want to go and go zone 2, knock yourself out, but be aware of the actual science behind it. And zone 2 comes back to this idea again, where if you look at any of the pre-core machines from the 90s and early aughts, they would have a zone that was called the fat burning zone.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a whole section in here, it's a whole chapter. There's no such thing as a fat burning zone. This is absolute nonsense.
I'm again, you're speaking my language, so I love it. But yeah, and so I think both things are true. Like you said, some people just can't tolerate it. They can't hate it. They don't mind the longer, slower stuff. But yeah, the science, as you say, is on our side. We here, do a lot of, obviously high intensity strength training, but we also couple it with interval stuff, with a lot of these brief, and people like it, and they learn to appreciate it, and they learn to value it, and they see the benefits. We work with just average Joes, and of course we work with runners and all kinds of people. But yeah, again, since I started my career in the 80s, I used to use the sort of trickle down, like Reaganomics, right? I used to use that as an example. I go, if you spend all your time in quote unquote zone 2, right, which let's say that's a 6 on a 1 to 10 scale of effort, then you get really great at everything that's up to a 6. But when you go above a 6, you feel like crap. You know what I mean? But if you train at an 8 or a 9 on a regular basis, anything below that feels easy. So that's what I used to use that as, my trickle down example. I'm like, so like train up here so that all the other stuff starts to feel easy. If you stay in zone 2 your whole life, and then suddenly you have to sprint to catch the bus, and you wonder why it takes you 5 minutes to recover after that. You're like, why do I feel out of breath? I thought I was in good shape,
But so we had, you see these guys that are blind runners, and they will typically, they will have a guide runner that goes along with them. A similar thing has been happening recently with open water swimming, is that you have a blind swimmer and you'll have a guide swimmer that's tethered to them, that makes sure that they stay out of harm's way. A couple of my athletes who were good open water swimmers were asking me my thoughts about it. They wanted to go and do this. I said, I think it's great, but how is it going to impact my training? Well, long, slow swimming is going to lead to a long, slow swimmer. So you're going to have to supplement some of your additional training to get the sprint portion back up so you don't lose that speed. But just like you're saying, if the only thing that you do is train this one specific energy zone, and I'm not a big fan of zones to begin with, but if that's what you're going to do, that's where you're going to be best.
Of course.
But you're going to have no additional range to move outside of that if you want to compete at a different level.
Yeah.
So it's all up to everybody's particular motives and what it is that they want to accomplish. If you're happiest with your Zen time of doing that really long run, that's what you should do.
Yeah.
Don't worry about what you and I are saying. But if you have a particular objective in mind, then you've got to bring in the science, and you're going to have to do some things that you may not really enjoy doing.
Yeah, 100% agree.
It all depends on the motivation.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's funny because, again, we work with lots of runners, recreational runners primarily. And, as I'm sure like runners only want to find a way to run more.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And they just think, if there's any way I can run more, I will just be so happy. And they tend to just get slower and slower, right? Because they're just doing more and more and more. And they just love the running. But some of them, they want to go run a race every now and then. And I'm like, if you're not working at a race pace, right, you're not going to be able to tolerate it. You have to go out and push it, right? And I worked with some runners who follow my plans, and I give them, very specific, higher intensity stuff to do. And they've had dramatic improvements in their, in their race times, right? With shorter workouts that are more intense. Again, I've just seen this, unfold hundreds of times. As an example, my business partner, who you met last time, Jesse, he likes to run Spartan races, and he just ran one last weekend, and I think he came in like in the the top 70 or 80 people out of about 1,600 people, and he only runs one 10K run a week. That's all he does. And he does strength training twice a week. That's his whole routine. His strength training is, hard to failure, right? High intensity efforts. And his run is as fast as he can do it. You know what I mean? Like, he just tries to improve his time in 10K, but he never runs more than that. And again, he's not winning these races, but he's placing in the top percentage like every single time, with like what most people would consider as like he's not even training, right? Like, how could he possibly be successful when he's only running once a week?
That's all he needs. But I'm sure he's doing some other short running within his workouts. And I can tell you what we did at our gym. We had a hill that was right outside of our gym, which was great. And so we could mark out the different telephone poles, 1 pole, 2 pole, 3 poles.
Right.
And so we would do a set of cleans or snatch right outside, run 4 poles, come back inside. You have 30 seconds rest. We're doing it again.
Yeah.
So they're still running. And so biomechanically, you get the sense of it. And also neurologically, you get the sense of it. But it's not the same thing as going pounding out 6 miles. It's just like when you're a kid, when we tell our parents to get the kids exercising, I don't mean for them to come into my gym and work out. Go let your kid play. Go leave the kid chase a ball somewhere around with some of his friends, or just be outside. That's the best kind of exercise. That kind of stuff is what adults do when they go to a CrossFit gym or something of that ilk, is that they're getting a huge variety of different modalities to break up the monotony of doing something that's going to give you diminishing returns, which is the primary reason that most people drop out of an exercise routine to begin with, is that they get bored and they don't see any advancements. So these are the kinds of things that allow you to do both.
For sure. Yeah, no, it's funny. I used to spend, growing up, I spent my summers every summer, like at the beach. My father would take us camping and we'd be on the ocean, and all I would do is play in the water all day, every day.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of the summer, I was always in such good shape. I was tan and I was like very fit because I was just, all I did was, body surfing and jumping around in the waves. And then when I was tired, I'd lie in the sun, and then I would just do that all day long, every day. And, and
you're going to burn a ton of calories just by doing that, because you're in water, which is going to make you burn more calories than on land.
Yeah. So that would be I'd do a month of that every summer, growing up, and I would always be in great shape going back into school, and I was just having fun. I didn't go to the gym. Yeah. Those days are good.
If you don't mind, I'd like to just go back to the book, because we mentioned about, the total calories that were being consumed by the Hadza relative to what we ate. But the other really important component of this is not just the total number of calories. It's also the composition of the diet itself.
Sure.
And in this case, we have a hunter-gatherer tribe. Every single thing that they're eating is going to be minimally, if processed at all. Now, what does that mean? Why is this whole idea of processing an issue? Anything that you do to food to prepare it for consumption is processing. So if you take a raw apple and we cut it in half, we've processed it to some degree. Now, if you just take that whole apple and you bite into it, you're already putting energy into the process of digesting and assimilating that food. When we process something, we're making it so that we can break it down and assimilate it like that, and the body has to do very little extra work. So that idea of we have to put energy in to get energy out, so kind of priming the pump to get energy out of our food, that's called the thermic effect of food.
Yep.
Okay. So we generate body heat by digesting our foods. Raw foods will liberate more heat than will processed foods, because processed foods are ready to be consumed and digested and absorbed immediately. That's the majority of our diet, not theirs.
Sure.
They eat things that have to be chewed a lot and then swallowed and then broken down within the body and then assimilated. That takes time and energy. And so we see all that. The meats that they eat are going to be, again, fresh, mostly muscle meats, but they also eat these other things that are going to be organ meats, which, again, I don't know where you grew up. In my family, I've got a father from Scotland, poor family. I've got a mother from Venezuela, poor family. Those cultures will eat every last bit of that animal because they don't have the option of wasting things. So we're talking about eyes, brain, tongue, kidney, liver, testes to some degree, ovaries, pancreas. I could go on and on. Bone marrow is a huge one. We're big fans of bone marrow in this family. Those organ meats contain significant micronutrients that we don't get in our diet at all.
For sure.
So those things, by and large, are just tossed out, or somebody of lesser means who's grown up eating those things will buy them at the grocery store and make them for their families. Organ meats are critically important. That brings me to my last point in terms of their diet, and it's such an easy thing to fix, and that's fiber. So let me explain what fiber is. Fiber is basically, we got two components. We have soluble fiber that we can actually absorb to some degree, and that we don't have the capacity to break it down, but we have gut bacteria that can do it. And when they do so, they produce these short chain fatty acids, one of which is butyrate, that our gut really likes. So we're giving this food to a commensal bacteria that is then making a food product for the epithelial layer of our gut that keeps it nice and sealed shut so we don't have bacteria going through and causing inflammation. Then we have insoluble fiber, which you just can't break down at all. But the good thing about insoluble fiber is that it reduces the transit time for how long it takes this food stuff to go through your colon. There is a direct correlation between the amount of time that the food spends in your digestive tract and the incidence of colorectal cancer.
Mm.
The longer it's there, the more we expose these cells to toxins that we produce or come in with the food stuff, and it increases the likelihood of getting cancer in the long term. If you reduce that transit time, in other words, make it go through faster, then that's going to reduce the likelihood of you getting cancer. So how do we, the Hadza will eat grams and grams and grams, up to 60 grams a day of fiber. We get in between 2 and 10. It's a paltry amount, and it's easy to fix. All you need to do is eat things that have a nice skin to them if they're fruits and vegetables or green leafy vegetables. Things that have the components of the plant or the structural components, effectively, the cell walls. Those are the things that if you eat more of, you will dramatically improve your weight loss capacity and then your overall health.
Yeah. It's funny that this is another thing that comes up with me like for years. It's funny how the Western diet, they'll say, well, we should be consuming, whole grains, right? And then they'll say things like, eat a bagel and some, and I've been telling people for years, I go, if something has been taken and then pulverized and turned into powder and then made into something else, right? That's not a whole grain. Like it stopped being a whole grain a long time ago, right? You can't call a bagel whole grain, you know what I mean? Or a piece of bread or whatever. It's like, talk about, things being processed, right?
Sure.
Almost everything's processed in some way. Like you say, someone might buy an apple, but it's already been chopped into slices in a bag.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's funny how we think that things are whole or whatever. It's like it isn't whole if they turn it into something else. And I go, by the way, you're not going to eat wheat off the stalk. Like we're not designed for that. Yeah. It's like eating a pine cone or something. But yeah, it's just interesting to me that people just don't understand. And yeah,
no,
the fiber thing is interesting. So now, do you think that we could get that kind of high quality fiber by just making those types of choices, in our, supermarket fare, if you will?
Sure. Yes. And I mean, obviously you can take a supplement like Metamucil, but obviously you're not going to get any additional benefits of it in terms of the micronutrients that are going to come in with an apple or a salad. So yeah, it is really easy to make these changes. Now, I don't think anybody needs to bump themselves up to 60 grams a day, but by adding in raw fruits and vegetables to your diet for just one meal, you've gotten yourself up to about 12. And that's a good number. And so, again, fiber can reduce your cholesterol levels if you need to, because it binds to bile salts, which are made from cholesterol, obviously. So there's a number of different benefits that come along with these simple changes. The problem, let me also throw this thing out there. When we talked about how some people just want to do zone 2.
Sure.
If you look at survey data of individuals who you would consider to be relatively uneducated in terms of their health, in terms of diet, what's one thing that you could do today in terms of cutting out of your diet that would benefit your health? 96 to 97% of people who are surveyed will say cut out the processed and fast foods. What's one thing that you could add to your diet that would benefit your health? About the same number say add more fruits and vegetables. So it's not that people don't know.
Right.
It's just that it's a matter of motivation. People will say they just don't have time. There's ways around that. You can also say that these raw foods are more expensive. They can be. The problem being that you have to restock them regularly. So if you don't do a good job of eating them, they're not going to have the same shelf life as the box of Uncle Ben's white rice in your pantry.
Sure.
But there's ways around that too. In terms of fruits and vegetables, you can buy fruits and vegetables that are frozen. They're picked at the peak of their ripeness, and then they're frozen. You can use them anytime. You don't have the same luxury with leafy vegetables because they'll wilt, but if they can stay for a very long time if you'll buy a real simple food vacuum to seal things. Salads will stay in those bags for up to 3 weeks and still be good once you pop them open. So it takes some additional effort without question, but the long-term benefits to your health are significant.
Yeah, it's funny. I just personally have always loved salad. So like I eat I what I call like a big ass salad probably once a day. And I like it to have all kinds of stuff in it. You know what I mean? Like, radishes and cucumbers and like not just lettuce, but I don't know, maybe I was brought up that way, but it's like that's something I eat pretty much every day. I have like a big ass salad. And it's funny because I'm also a meat eater, and I'm a proponent of animal-based protein. I think it's good for us. And it's funny how like the sort of the vegan vegetarian crowd just lumps you in like, oh, you like meat? Well, why don't you like vegetables? I'm like, what are you talking about? I never said anything. I never said anything bad about vegetables. I just said you should be eating meat. I was like, it's not an either or thing. Have both. I recommend it. You know what I mean?
I agree.
I'm always telling people, like, the people, I'm like, eggs are not baby chickens, right? You get that?
Yeah,
like,
they're unfertilized.
Yeah, I was like, that was never going to be a chicken in there.
I agree with that one too. There's another anecdote that I wanted to share with you about the wheat thing. So for many, many years, you would have foodstuffs that were brought from England or one of their colonies over to the States. And of course, that's a transatlantic shipping that they got to go through. It's got to be pretty shelf stable. And when they figured out how to separate out the endosperm from the rest of the wheat and get rid of it, the endosperm is just the bleached white part that we think of as being flour. So when they figured out how to do that, what they saw as an additional benefit when they were shipping these things across, one, it lasted longer. It didn't mold as quickly. And then the rats that were on the ships didn't want to eat it. They preferred to actually eat the whole grain because it had more calories to it. So if you're eating something as a regular component of your diet that even rats will turn their nose up at, you shouldn't be eating that thing.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Oh my God. Yeah, it's a battle. It's an ongoing battle. So now you sold your gym, and I know you're working with that research group, right? Tell us about that one, just to let everybody know.
I work for Wiley Publishing, so I'm the editor in chief of one of their science journals called Current Protocols.
Awesome. So
I sold the gym and I went back to academia for 3 years. I got all the way up to department chair and associate professor. But as is almost always the case with academics, our spouses make much more than we do. So my wife out earns me now at least 5 to 1, and so she got a promotion.
Well, good for you.
Yes. That's why I'm here talking to you now. I have the time. But my wife got a promotion almost 4 years ago now that moved us from San Antonio up to Dallas. And so the only place I could get an academic job that quickly was University of North Texas. Great institution. I enjoyed the short time that I was there, but that was a 60-mile commute 3 days a week, and I was just not into it.
Yeah.
So I left there and I took the job with Wiley. And so now I work at the front lines of science on a daily basis, working with these folks who are developing new techniques that we then publish and disseminate to the world, so that everybody can catch up and be able to conduct their studies as efficiently as possible.
Awesome. And how does one access that information? Is it like something you can subscribe to, or?
You can. I mean, our journal is what's called a hybrid journal. So about half the content on there is open access.
Okay.
So you don't even need a subscription. But if you're interested in the rest of the content that is subscription based, you can either pay for it yourself, or the best, you can go to your local library and via interlibrary loan get a PDF sent to you within 24 hours when you make a request. So if any of your readers are interested, just go to Current Protocols and just do a Google search. It'll pop right up. And then we have 17 different sections. So there's cell biology, microbiology, there's neuroscience, there's cytometry, etc. And so there's a number of different sciences that are present there that people can go and read through to see about the different protocols that are being developed these days.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I'm loving all this stuff so far. So now I wanted to change course slightly and talk a little bit, as I mentioned at the top of the show, about this discussion we were having about low carb nutrition plans and how they relate to like endurance based sports, because I know this is something that you've been doing some talking about or researching on yourself. And you and I sent some emails briefly back and forth not long ago, and it was interesting, if I'm remembering correctly, because it looked like a lot of the science says that it can be beneficial for endurance activities to be on a low carb thing, but ultimately it seems like you feel like it's not the best choice.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. Not on a low carb diet to the degree that these folks are talking about. So the studies that I looked at were, one, having endurance athletes do the keto diet.
Okay.
So this is going to be a chronic exposure to a keto diet, and I'll explain what that means in just a second. And then secondly, having a more normal diet, but then taking in keto supplements either immediately before or immediately after a workout to see what kind of impacts it has, not just on endurance activities, but also in sprinting. Okay, so what is the keto diet? So if we get into a state of, well, I guess I'm not really going to call it starvation, but we've been stripped out of our carbs. So as we stated before, we will store carbohydrates in our liver, which is basically meant mostly for the brain. So we can liberate that carbohydrate and the brain has a fuel source immediately available to it. But then also in our skeletal muscles that's used directly in the skeletal muscle. So once we burn through that and like within our liver, we go to bed at night, we wake up the next morning, that's gone. We used it during the night to have our body recover from its daily activities and rest and regenerate, etc. When we wake up in the morning, that is gone and our blood glucose levels are relatively low and we need to refill that. In terms of muscle, we can strip that pretty quickly depending on what it is that we're doing. So let's say that we have somebody who's been without carbohydrates for at least 24 to 48 hours. It may have to go a little bit longer depending on the individual. Eventually, the brain says, look, I've got to have some carbs. Now, we have the capacity to make new carbohydrates from things that are not carbohydrates, and that's called gluconeogenesis. So gluco, sugar, new, genesis, making it from something that's not a carbohydrate. What are our choices? We've got fat and we've got protein. Protein will do it quicker. Fat is going to be more sustainable. Because remember, we have no storage form of protein. Anything we have in our body that's protein is functional. We have to strip away functional proteins. So what we do...
That's why we got to eat it, people.
That's right. We start to burn those fats for the purposes of making keto so the brain has something to actually burn off. Now, this diet was developed in the 20s for epileptic children. And what we see with epilepsy is that it's a disease of convulsions that we're still not entirely sure what triggers it. But one of the things that's key to it is that the brain in epileptic patients burns carbohydrates at a much faster level, which makes it so that their brain is basically triggered and ready to go at any time to have these very random neural empaths that are going back and forth within the brain that causes these convulsions. So one of the treatments that was devised back in the day was to strip those carbohydrates out of the diet and reduce them significantly. And what happened was that the symptoms did decrease. And as a secondary corollary, all the subjects lost weight.
Right.
So therein lies why we find it to be such an interesting diet. Should we actually allow our athletes to do the keto diet instead of a carbohydrate-rich diet? For people who are in a position where they want to maintain their lean body mass, a keto diet's a great idea. Within weightlifters and powerlifters, we see that there is at least an improvement in body composition and not necessarily performance. But if you can keep yourself from having to go, because remember, weightlifting is going to be a weight class sport.
Right.
I competed in weightlifting, but I was a heavyweight, so I would weigh in, but it didn't matter because there was never going to be a penalty. But if you're overweight, then you either have to bump up to the next weight class or you have to get rid of that additional mass. And when people make weight, they do horrible things to their body. So if you can make weight by being on a keto diet, it's better for you than doing otherwise. But when we come back and we look at the endurance athletes, that's where we start to see some either equivocation. In other words, they do just as well as they would on a carbohydrate-rich diet, but in most instances, they do more poorly because in an endurance trained subject, once they get above their lactate threshold, they're not really going to be able to burn fats very quickly, if at all.
Sure.
They're definitely going to burn them. I shouldn't say if at all. They will definitely burn fats, but just not as fast as they would otherwise. But carbs just burn faster than do fats.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. So endurance athletes need a base level of carbohydrate ingestion, but it doesn't have to necessarily be simple carbohydrates unless they're in a recovery phase immediately after a workout. I would suggest that they take in some that are simple carbohydrates. And by that, we mean simple sugars. And then during the actual event, definitely make it simple sugars because you don't want to have to waste time and energy on the thermic effect of food and breaking down more complex carbohydrates to satisfy your muscular needs. It's the times in between where they can have a little bit of a leeway there. Now, the one thing that I will say, the results that we see in those studies where they saw improvements in power and sprint performance, they're really looking at the difference in not absolute power, but power per weight ratio, which is critically important.
Yeah.
So I did the Otillo swim run last Sunday in Austin, and I placed okay, 13th in the shortest distance you could possibly go. But as I looked around to all the people around me who were, and I killed them all in the swim because I'm a swimmer. But on the runs, I can't keep up because I'm 265 pounds. And so my strength to weight ratio is so small relative to these little gazelles whose denominator is much smaller than mine. That said, if you're an endurance athlete and you want to lose a couple of pounds so that your strength to weight ratio, your power to weight ratio goes up, the keto diet is not necessarily a bad thing to do in the training phase leading up to your race.
Got it. Now, I wonder, I'm just thinking out loud from processing this, like, because, I've worked with athletes, preparing for those things well. And, like, we've all heard probably, or many of us have heard of like carb loading, right? And that sort of thing. And what I found in my experience is that most people don't really understand what that is or how to do it. And the mistake they often make is they eat whatever their normal diet is. And then like the night before, they eat a big plate of spaghetti and they think they carb loaded, And I try to get them to understand, like, you need to deplete carbs before, if you want to really super compensate and like load them up more effectively. I'm wondering, would someone be able to say, let's say I'm a marathon runner, would I be able to train in a lower carb phase and then carb up for the event, or would it prevent me from training at a higher octane level sort of anyway? So would it just overall not be effective? Let's say I was like 6 months low carbs and then I like carbed up like 2 weeks before the race. Like, would that give me a bump, or would it be that I'm not really able to challenge myself as high at a higher output during the training, so it may not really have an outcome effect?
Yeah, you may not get the same physiological adaptations that you would expect because you're not able to train at the same intensities as you would without the carbohydrates present. So I would say that I would not do that if I were. I would make the switch to be more like a month to allow for some more intense training towards the end, right before the taper phase.
Yeah.
But to go back to your other point, the idea of stripping out your carbs and then hypercompensating, that's an older idea, and the science over the last 15 years has shown that you get just as much by not doing the stripping phase and just eating a little bit more carbohydrate at the end. Here's the big problem with that. People eat way too much. And what they end up doing is putting on an additional pound or two of fat mass at the very end as they're going through this taper phase, which is a controlled detraining, right? So we're going from highly trained and broken down to tapered, recovered, and to some degree slightly detrained. The body says, you're going to give me these extra calories? You better believe I'm going to take them, and we store them. So to hypercompensate is probably not the best answer either. Just eat a normal amount of carbohydrates. Your body is already really well tuned to that point to taking every last ounce of carbohydrate that you've given it to store.
Cool.
And so it's going to top off that tank just by itself without having to do too much.
Yeah. Awesome. That's good to know. Appreciate that. Fantastic. Man, I'm just going to have you like come on like every quarter.
All right, that sounds good. Well, we did my third book, which was Defensive Doping. This is now my first book.
Oh, okay.
There's the second book, which is the Swim Prescription, which talks all about how swimming is better, physiologically speaking, than land-based activities.
Nice.
So we can hit that one next if you like. And then my third book, I'm going to be putting out my fourth book is going to come out sometime in the spring. And that's all about, and I'm not sure you all talk this, but I'm going to put it out there anyway, is all about the myth of trans women in sports being fair in any way, shape, or form when they compete against biological women. The science behind this is extremely clear and has been for a very long time.
I was gonna say that sounds like it's gonna be a hard one to get anybody to want to work with you on it.
In terms of the topic,
publishing, and so forth.
We'll see. I don't know that it'll be that hard, but I self-published before. I'm quite content to do it again. It's not a book about bigotry. It's not a book about hatred. It's not a book about anything. All it is about is the science, plain and simple.
Yeah, sure.
That's it.
Yeah, I think the swimming thing would be very interesting for sure to discuss. I know. As I mentioned, my summers in the water were always very fruitful as far as my fitness goes, and that was just for fun. There was no conscious planning of it. It was freestyle. But I mean, if you were going to choose something, my dad was an avid swimmer and used to go every morning before work and swim laps and lift weights and all that stuff. And yeah, it's I would imagine it's much less traumatic to your body, right?
Oh, so much.
There's no pounding. You're buoyant. There's a lot of things.
I think I lost your mic there. I lost them altogether.
Now I have to say we had a little technical glitch at the end of this particular episode.
Uh-oh.
So it literally just cut off. I don't know what's going on. My computer is having some serious problems.
He seems to have frozen.
It's been plugged in all day, but it says it's
He only needed 2 more minutes, I think, for his closing arguments.
gonna be hours before it's fully charged. It's telling me I've only got a small percentage of power, so clearly there's something wrong with my charging capacity.
Let me text him.
My computer literally went black right in the middle of our conversation.
But I think he has what he needs.
So I apologize for the abrupt cutoff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Desmond will find some way to fix it because he's magic.
I'll go ahead and hop off, but just let him know it was a great conversation. I look forward to the next one.
So tune in for this episode of the Truth Not Trends podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, Alexander.
It was a pleasure to meet you, buddy.
All right, take care.
Take care.
Boom, baby.
Boom, baby. What's up, people? Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Truth Not Trends.
That's right here at TNT Strength Headquarters, Truth Not Trends.
Please, if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, rate, and review us on whatever platform you're listening to us on. And don't forget to share with a friend.
You can find us on the web at tntstrength.com.
That's right, TNT Strength now coming to you in person at 5255 College Avenue in Oakland, California. You can call the studio 510-768-5421. You can also text us at 855-796-9905.
Or shoot us an email at contact@tntstrength.com. And whatever you do, stay off of that stupid blue bubbly bosun.
Please stand by.
Mixed and edited by Desmond McNeese for We Mixed It, LLC. Go to whatsoundsawesome.com.
Whoa, brother.